Well, the United States and Chinese defense chiefs are set to hold rare direct talks in Singapore this weekend. The expected meeting between Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin and his Chinese counterpart, Dong Jun, will take place at the Shangri-La Dialogue. It's a security forum that has become a barometer of U.S.-China relations. Now, if they go ahead, there'll be the first substantive face-to-face talks between U.S. and Chinese defense chiefs in 18 months. It's hoped an open dialogue between two of the world's most powerful militaries will prevent confrontations in the region from spinning out of control, especially the flashpoint disputes over Taiwan and the South China Sea.
In the disputed South China Sea, a Filipino civilian flotilla is shadowed by the Chinese Coast Guard. Its mission, to deliver supplies to Filipino fishermen near Scarborough Shoal. The activists' group is called This Is Ours, which volunteers have written in Tagalog on the buoys they're floating here. But of the 100 vessels that set off, only a handful reached their destination. Many turned back after being followed by larger Chinese Coast Guard ships. The standoff is one of a number of maritime incidents that have stoked tensions between Manila and Beijing, who lay rival claims to a number of locations in the waters west of the Philippines. The Scarborough Shoal is one of the disputed areas. Its fertile fishing grounds fall within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, which you can see in yellow here. But they're also within China's so-called 9-dash line. China claims the area within, despite a 2016 international court ruling, it had no legal basis to do so. Beijing has dismissed the Philippine civilian mission as a publicity stunt, but also accused Manila of frequently aggravating tensions in the South China Sea.
If the Philippine side is bent on having its own way, China will take the necessary measures to firmly defend its legitimate rights and interests.
Since those comments, tensions have risen even further in the region, with Beijing launching war games around the Philippines' northern neighbor, Taiwan. Citing the Defense Ministry in Taipei, Reuters reported that Chinese warplanes also flew into the Bashi Channel, which separates Taiwan and the Philippines. Manila didn't directly address Beijing's latest maneuvers, but at a Navy ceremony last week, the Philippine Defense Secretary said his country was committed to defending its territorial interests.
We will train more realistically. There will be more maritime cooperative activities between us and like-minded nations, more training scenarios, more interoperability exercises involving also our civilian counterparts.
In early May, Manila already staged large-scale war drills with its mutual defense treaty ally, the United States. It involved more than 16,000 military personnel and infuriated Beijing. Also last week, the Philippine Coast Guard announced the opening of a new security outpost on a far northern island, a stated response to China's military build-up near Taiwan over the past 2 years, and a way to counter threats, including, quote, foreign intrusions.
Well, I'm joined now by Oriana Skylar Mastro. She's an expert on Chinese politics. She's currently a fellow at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. She's also with the Cárnegie Endowment for International Peace. Her latest book is entitled Upstart, How China Became a Great Power. The book looks at how China has successfully competed for power in the past 3 decades. It's good to have you on the program with us. We got a lot to talk about, and talking about difficult dialogue. What can we expect from talks between the U.S. Secretary of Defense and his new Chinese counterpart? I want to ask you, are these two men, in your opinion, are they able to speak the same language?
Well, they're not able to speak the same language, and they're also not even in the same positions. The Minister of Defense in the Chinese system is primarily the top foreigner handler. He doesn't have operational control over the armed forces. He's not at the top of the hierarchy in terms of decision making in the military. So the United States has tried for many years to get a different counterpart for the Secretary of Defense, a vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, or someone that has the power more commensurate with what the U.S. Secretary of Defense has. So it's not only that they have different interests, they quite literally do not speak the same language, but they also are not really peers within their systems.
So is it a good sign then that he's even at these talks in Singapore? I mean, is it an attempt to meet at eye level?
I wouldn't necessarily take it as a good sign that the Chinese or that the United States are attending these talks. Shangri-La has been a very useful place for defense ministers and Secretary of Defenses to meet in the past. So they always go. The question then is, do they have these sideline meetings and how productive they are? And I don't really expect for the United States and China to really reach any sort of significant agreement. It's probably going to be more of a drive-by handshake, perhaps an opportunity for the United States to reemphasize some messages on Taiwan and the South China Sea. But I don't think it's really a reset or a new beginning to a more constructive mill-to-mill relationship.
We know the concern about escalation, is as strong and as salient as ever. How important is a direct line between the Chinese and U.S. militaries? I mean, the potential for a disastrous misunderstanding seems enormous.
If there were to be a conflict between China and the United States, the costs are so high that it's important for all parties to try everything in their power to prevent it. That being said, these types of dialogues or direct contacts between two sides, they only really prevent conflict if there's some sort of misunderstanding or accident that lies at the heart of that escalation. If it's deliberate and provocative, like I would argue is the case of Chinese behavior in the South China Sea, the United States having a direct line to tell China that what they're doing vis-a-vis the Philippines, for example, is unacceptable and dangerous, doesn't really bring the temperature down in the region.
But then how do you explain what we've seen in the past? There was this incident where the Pentagon attempted to call Beijing and said that they wouldn't answer the phone.
Well, exactly. So in these cases, China is being very deliberate about their dangerous activities. It's a risk manipulation strategy. They're rocking the boat and they're saying, we're willing to let it tip over, are you? And so part of the strategy is to increase the anxiety in the United States by not allowing that communication to happen, with the hope that then the United States unilaterally backs down. And it's worked in the past. So it is a somewhat successful Chinese strategy, as I lay out in my book, but one that makes it problematic for the United States and its allies.
What would you say is the biggest security threat in the Asia-Pacific region right now? I mean, where could we see a dangerous escalation?
I am personally much more concerned about an escalation over Taiwan than I am in the South China Sea. And that's only because the Chinese military doesn't have the capability right now to project power across the South China Sea. So the U.S. military still has a significant deterrent in that theater. Taiwan, however, is very close to China, and they have a local advantage, and they are getting more and more confident in their ability to achieve their goals by force. And so if I had to rank order the things that keep me up at night, Taiwan is definitely at the top.
And in terms of the Chinese military strength, is there still this balance, as you put it in one of your articles that we read, is there this balance of deterrence and reassurance?
So the deterrence and reassurance is very hard, but this is what's necessary. On one hand, you have to have a credible threat, but you also have to promise the other side that you won't hurt them if they do what you've asked them to do. I would say right now, the United States is very focused on the credible threat problem, and that's important. And we've moved a little bit too far away from the reassurance piece. And so work has to be done on both ends, on the credible threat as well as credible reassurance, to ensure that peace and stability are maintained, especially in the Taiwan Strait.
How much of a security threat are China's hypersonic missiles? I'm wondering, does the United States, its allies, do they have an answer to this weapon?
So there's good news and bad news about this. I mean, the hypersonics are extremely dangerous because they're hard to defeat. They're hard to defend against. They're they're specifically designed to evade detection, and they therefore present a significant threat to U.S. allies and partners. But it doesn't really change the strategic environment because the missiles China already has that are not hypersonic, the United States and its allies cannot defend against adequately. So this just makes it extra hard, I guess, but it doesn't fundamentally change the strategic or operational environment, in my view.
Before we run out of time, I want to ask you, do you think the United States is being locked into a regional conflict if China oversteps? And I'm thinking of the security agreement with the Philippines, for example. And I want to ask you, too, about last year, a four-star U.S. general wrote in a memo that was obtained by NBC News that his gut tells him that the U.S. will be at war with China in 2025. How do you read that?
Well, while I don't have any personal interaction with that specific general, as someone who's worked with high-level military leadership before, my interpretation of that was more that it was a signal internally to try to get a sense of urgency within the Pentagon to heighten the readiness of U.S. forces for conflict in the future. But empirically speaking, there's a very, very, very low probability that the Chinese military will be ready to take Taiwan by force before 2027. So I'm not concerned about 2025, but I understand the nature of that letter and why it was written.
All right. Oriana Skylar Mastro, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We'll be looking forward to your new book. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm joined now by Harrison Prétat. He's Deputy Director with the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Prétat, it's good to have you with us. We know that the president of the Philippines, Mr. Marcos, he's taken a tougher line than his predecessors have when it comes to China's actions in the South China Sea. What are you expecting to hear him say in this speech tomorrow?
Well, I think he's going to paint the Philippines as being a real defender of the international rules that actually affect everyone. These tensions between China and the Philippines have gone on for over 2 years now, where it's basically every few weeks. The two sides are coming into serious contact between their coast guards, between their fishermen and militia. And I think he's going to put a little pressure on the region to show more support than they've been getting for this position that they've been forced into in the South China Sea.
You say the incidents that we've seen between China and the Philippines, they've grown more tense. They've happened more frequently. Where do you think this is heading? I mean, can we predict where it's headed?
I mean, it's hard to predict. China is certainly hoping that they're able to stop the Philippine resupply missions to Second Thomas Shoal, and that the Philippine ship that is grounded there and which the Philippines has Marines on, they're hoping that ship is going to fall into the water. Obviously, the Philippines does not want that to happen, and really the U.S. does not want that to happen. There's a strong incentive for the U.S. to show the value of its alliance with the Philippines here. Given a historical track record of, questioning of that in the Philippines, especially after the 2012 incident where China effectively seized control of Scarborough Shoal.
We know that other countries, I want to come back to the U.S. in just a moment. We know other countries, aside from the Philippines, they have claims to the South China Sea. China has disputes with them, but it doesn't seem to resort to the same kind of intimidation tactics. Why is that? How would you say Beijing views the government in Manila?
Well, you're absolutely right. There's other claimants who have very similar claims in terms of their EEZs overlapping with China's 9-dash line. But I think that China has been a little surprised with the Philippines' new approach in terms of publicizing the on-the-water activities so directly and so instantaneously, inviting media along on these rides. The other claimants do not publicize what's going on to the same degree at all. And in fact, Vietnam, Malaysia are known to be a lot quieter and deal with these things more in private negotiations. In terms of the Philippines' response here, I think that it's kind of caught China off guard, and China's been forced into a position where it's responding, and unfortunately, that's only escalated tensions.
The Philippines has increased security ties with the U.S., as you were saying, especially under President Marcos. The two nations have a mutual defense treaty that goes back, 70 years. There is the worry in Washington that the U.S. could be dragged into a dispute with China if things escalate with the Philippines. What are the chances of that happening, would you say?
Definitely Manila, Washington, and even Beijing are all worried about the possible invocation of the Mutual Defense Treaty and the triggering of that alliance commitment with these tensions. I think currently they're focused on trying to keep that from happening. But it's a tough thing to do when every few weeks a Philippine ship is getting its windows blown out by a water cannon from a much larger China Coast Guard vessel. We've had people getting injured, and I think in the case that a casualty occurs, it will be very hard to keep that treaty commitment from coming into effect in some way. Yeah. So I think, they're having to consider what that would look like right now.
Yeah, the possibility of escalation, it seems to be growing by the month, you could say. Mr. Harrison Prétat, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We appreciate your analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.